I want to talk a little bit about how artists can create something that is both personal and also relatable. And the reason being is because I am an existential creator. What I make in my paintings, what I make in my designs, what I make in my essays and poetry, what I do in these things are very specific. I use very specific examples, specific symbols, especially in my writing. I think I try to draw on personal experiences quite a bit. And my art is a little bit more symbolic, but still very, very specific examples. Like I have like a two-headed dog. Why do I have a two-headed dog? What's that about? How do we do that? Now, the reason I'm thinking to talk about this is someone asked me, and I was like, what? That is a tricky thing, like line to toe. And the reason it's tricky is because we have very, very experiential lives, as we all like, that's kind of the whole shtick, is that we live through our experiences, our perspectives. All of these things are very, very specific to us, and our perspectives and our beliefs all form through these experiences. I wanted to basically, yeah, just talk about how do we create works of any kind that are both personal and universal. How do we find that balance? And how do we bring about a unique voice when we're trying to relate to people? Because you don't want to create something that's like too unique that people are like, I don't get what you're trying to say. Unless it's, not like if the purpose is to do that, then whatever. But obviously, if the purpose is to make something where you can connect with someone, then the goal would be, yeah, to find a way to unite this more maybe universal experience and our personal ones. And when I was first asked this, I was like, fuck, like I don't fucking know. I really don't, especially like my poetry, and especially like anything that I've written is very much leaning on my very specific personal experience and the thoughts that go in my head. And of course people can relate to them because we're people, and it starts with the idea that our experiences are so far and so different than others. And though our experiences are different, the way that my life has unfolded will never have the same relatability as anyone. It's not so far off to say that someone will at least 60% understand. It can be really challenging when we say to ourselves that like our experiences become barriers for connection. And I understand how they could. And I understand like I have experiences specifically from like my childhood that like weren't defining moments for other people's childhoods. When I went to university, and I'm from the Greater Toronto area, so it's like very specific of an experience. I'm currently living in a major city in one of the most densely populated areas in Canada, meeting people in university that were from like who the fuck knows where, and their worldview was just like, we didn't have this, that wasn't a thing, we had one general store, and it's like, well, I have all these like specifics for relatability that I have with peers that I grew up with, and that makes sense. And you should never like try to claim ownership or understanding over experiences of others, but there are unifying factors, and those unifying factors are what we call emotions. I think when we're tackling personal topics that we seek to find relatability, it's leaning on those emotions. When I'm creating a piece, I'm not expecting someone to be like, yes, I know exactly how you feel working at your specific job that you specifically hate for these specific reasons. I've been there, done that. I expect maybe that you relate to the sense of suffocation or being in an unideal workplace, or this is just an example, but I expect that you relate to some of these broader sensations, not the specifics. And so when I say my examples and I say this has led me to feel like this, which has led to this thought, especially in my essays where I say this very specific occurrence has led to this train of thinking that expands to a wider set of patterns, that's when I start to welcome the scope of the universal. When I talk about grief, when I talk about no one's going to understand what it's like to grieve the same way that I grieve, just like someone around me who's grieving grieves differently than I do, but we know grief, that feeling we know, and it's universal. You can't avoid it. There's not a person in this world who will not lose someone that they love or who has experienced loss of any kind, because grief is not just, death or the process of losing someone through death. It's the process of change and our responses to change, our responses to impermanence. And we can use examples that are specific and personal to articulate that and create a personal work that is cathartic for the creator, but is also just relatable because you understand what it's like to be a person. My work, I think, has an easy route. I'm not always looking for, when I create, to pick at the niches, to pick at the parts of myself that I view are different. This might be so weird, but when I was younger, obviously I was a 13-year-old girl once, don't recommend it, and you're insecure about everything feels wrong. If you're like, why is everything uncomfortable? Why do I feel too tight in my skin? Why am I so weird? Why are people looking at me weird? I had to remind myself, and I think a part of this is like the neurodivergence that I just didn't know that I had, but I'm not an alien that came from another planet, to my knowledge. Though when I was a kid, I was really hoping that was the case. By the time I was like 13, 14, I was like, I can't be that weird. Like I can't. I have the limitations of a human mind that grant me humanness and all facets of that. Unless I'm like out doing some crazy shit, which I'm not. The way that I think and feel is really not all that different than how other people think and feel. If I become more comfortable in that humanness, perhaps I can make other people feel like not that, like not the way that I felt, where I felt like, hold on, you're not, but also everyone is a fucking imposter when they're 13. I feel for 13-year-olds. I feel for kids in general. It's so hard welcoming yourself into the world and you just don't get it. And the older you get, the more you don't get it. And then you end up like, going through the cycle of teaching kids like they don't get it, but they just get it differently. And it's, I don't know. It's just like the world is so small when you're a kid. This is all beside the point. But this is all to say that when I started to create in this more abstract existential way, I had the easy route because I was thinking to myself, how do I make work that binds me to other people through these kind of more intimate vulnerabilities that we don't always talk about or think about, or that maybe we're ashamed to admit, that when we talk about like no taboos off the table, and we talk about shame of any kind, we talk about I feel like I'm being mistreated in this job, I feel like I maybe deserve this mistreatment. I'm going with the job thing, hopefully that resonates. Or I feel rejected, or someone has told me that I'm not good enough, or like these are things that are obviously, we're like, duh, everyone feels that way. But how often do you like really explore those feelings in specifics that now you've opened the dialogue in a more intimate way? It's not shallow to say, let me explore these universal themes like happiness, joy, contentment, love. These are all things that we all know about. And when we don't talk about them, they become outside of the scope of our experience. We think that they are just happenstance. These are foundational aspects of the human experience. There's a reason. I'm not saying that there's like, God was like, give happiness, but I am saying that there's the capacity in the human experience to deal with complexity and to enjoy it in its complexity, and to enjoy that through communication as well. And so when we want to express universality of any kind, it's leaning on that humanness, because there's going to be variations in cultural conditioning. There's going to be variations from fucking door to door, right? From the way your parents raised you, or the way your guardians raised you, or the school you went to, or the way that you went to that school and, certain kids treated you, or the way that you entered a certain job and so treated you this way, or the way that you went through a breakup and the way that person loved you or didn't love you, or they treated you badly or they treated you amazingly. These are all the intimacies of our lives that relate to these wider patterns that we all understand. I think when we like lean back to that, I say lean back, but it's just like you get the broader picture. This life is not so, like, as someone who has a great respect for nuance, it's not that hard to say these things, are a sum of the whole. We have these universal experiences that we can find. And though everyone experiences life differently, it's through these kind of mechanisms that are different, not through our wiring is not very different. Anxiety exists among people, the sense of rejection exists among people. And of course, again, cultural conditioning will change the way that we relate to those feelings, but we can present them through the stories and through communication. This is how I'm presenting this thing that you understand. And maybe you understand it differently, but maybe if I show you this way, you can shift the way that you see the thing that you understand. And maybe when you present to me this thing that you feel differently, I can begin to see this thing that we both feel, but I can understand it how you feel it, or I can try my best. I can try my best. But the reality is there is no capital T truth. And so there is no way for me to create work that aims to speak universally without painting with way too wide of a brush. And often I worry sometimes when I speak from my own experience that I'm doing that, just because, like anything, everything is like, take it with a fucking grain of salt. Everything is nuanced. Everything is far more detailed and intricate when viewed in different contexts. And we can take that. But if I were to say like, this is joy. Okay, well, how is that presented? Because this is joy is not joy to everybody. So how is joy to you? And that's the bridge, because now I get it. Insert personal experience. And then now we've provided a little bit of context for where that universal experience comes to be. And again, everyone experience. I remember there's a girl I used to work with, and she's like, no, never really felt anxious. I felt anxious brushing my teeth this morning. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's funny, and some people will be like, oh yeah, anxiety is, I'm just nervous. Just nervous? I've never felt just nervous in my life. I've never felt just nervous. Yeah, I'm just, just a little bit of nerves. No, I'm like holding back, maybe possibly throwing up. Let's bring it back to the context of like things that we create, because I'm talking about it in communication, which is the same thing. The arts or any form of creation is a form of communication. It's the way that we express ourselves. It's the way that it's like words. Words are like words. It's the experience of communicating something, articulating something in a way that makes sense to articulate it. So if I'm like, that's why a lot of my content between if we want to even talk about like social media, if you want to talk about what I post on Substack versus what I post on YouTube versus what I post on Instagram versus what I post on TikTok, there are different tools for communication. And then the way that I use language or use art to communicate the things that I want to communicate is also different between the way that I present it. Like, I'm not going to unite maybe the way that I write an essay on the way that I paint, but I will often connect my poetry to my art. It's weird. It's just what are the mechanisms for communication that we have available to us, and how can we use the specifics of our lives and the specifics of our experience to connect to bigger concepts that maybe transcend this all. Let's just talk about what we call a sign and a signifier, or signifier and a signified. Signifier and a signified. A signifier would be me saying apple. Signified is what you see in your head, apple. You know what an apple is conceptually, you understand apple. But I've only said apple. That word is a symbol that's representing the image you have in your head or your understanding of what an apple would be in lived reality. Neither of which are real. They're both abstractions. Symbols are abstractions, and so is the image that comes about through the interpretation of the symbol. All abstractions. Are you with me still? Is this still making sense? And that's how, language works, right? It's how meaning making works. It's how we have stronger senses of meaning that become more or less universal, whether or not that's universal on like every single human being feels that way, or every single conscious being or sentient being feels this way, or if it's that, members of a community recognize it in this way. Symbols hold social meaning, and you can use what maybe has more social or cultural weight to depict something that you understand personally. For example, I have a painting that is very much about childhood, very much about nostalgia, very much about immaturity, and I use a carousel because we all know who's a carousel for. What do these colors relate to? What does this experience relate to? You can use symbols, again, that when I say carousel, that signifier brings to you a whole set of internal data where you're saying, okay, carousel, okay, carnival, okay, I remember that one time I was a kid and I was on a carousel, and I remember that one time that, my parents took me on the carousel and maybe I threw up, or maybe whatever. You have these things, and then now what do you associate? Think of it like a tree branch. Now, what do you associate with? You associate it with now with childhood. You associate it now with maybe a time that was, 20 to 30 years ago. And so now we've gone not only we've changed context symbolically to not only a different stage of life, but a different time in society. And so we have these, and the carousels still exist and we still have them, but we still associate them with youth, and we still associate them with who's using those things. There's data that is beyond just your image of a carousel that you are interpreting. And you can use these symbols, again, to communicate that without saying, this is about children. This is about being a kid. This is about youthfulness. You know what I mean? It's not so direct. And so I can say to you, apple. Again, apple. Okay, what do you think of when you think about apple? Do you think about an apple a day keeps the doctor away? Do you think about apple picking when you were a kid? Do you think about teachers, like the whole giving your teacher an apple trick, like they're conning their teachers? The trope, like you set in data that is through cultural conditioning that we can interpret these things through, and we can understand that, hey, that's usually read this way. And there's obviously cause for and space for variation. But the reality is that my personal experience of what I'm trying to articulate is using these symbols that I understand have cultural and social weight to it to articulate that. And that is how you bridge class dismissed, where's my apple? There is really so many ways that you can use symbols in this way. And I'm not going to like really harp on this too much, but to answer the question in the most succinct way possible, how can you bridge universal themes and personal themes to create a work that meets both? And the reality is that come into it with your own stories and use symbols that are palatable to others. If I'm coming to it with my niche and I'm giving my experience, now you need to extend it. There is no just, okay, this is me, this. How am I saying that? Because the only language that I understand is culturally conditioned anyways. So there is kind of this natural part of the process that how do I communicate this? How do I express this? How am I showing this? It's maybe not thinking about the audience, but it's thinking about communication, because everything comes down to that, especially when we create. We're not using, even I was having a conversation with a friend, even color, the way we use color in our art, the way we use metaphors in our, I mean, any literary device that we use in our writing, the way that we demonstrate food when we plate something, the way we demonstrate it. Like there are constantly a context clues, but also just like the way that we arrange things, the way that we use light, the way that we use color, the way that we use our self-expressions in our talking. Like you can hear me talking right now. If I was sitting here like this, you would take in the clues that maybe I don't want to fucking be here, but I'm not talking like that. I'm talking very like straightforward, and I'm in the comfort of my bedroom, so I'm not really going to have maybe this like shitty poo-poo attitude that I could have, unless I'm really good at acting. But you know, like there's so many things that you're drawing information from. There's so much information that's being brought in through the articulation of creativity. You're taking all of this, you know, emotional data, spitting it out this new reframed way, using what the tools at your disposal, which are symbols and our understanding of them. How do we understand these things? If you guys ever took an English class, you remember your teacher always saying, never start your things with the, it was a dark and stormy night, because that was done once. And then it became kind of a cliche. Again, a literary device. We understand dark and stormy night. Oh, okay. Kind of a poopy situation. Oh, okay. I don't really want to be in a dark and stormy night. Thanks. Yeah, where would I like to be in a dark and stormy night? Not there. So again, we have these kind of like symbols, more understood ways, and we have a general sense. Again, going back to me feeling like an alien as a kid, for some reason I brought that up. The limitations of your humanness, which is the limitations of our cultural understanding, the limitations of the technology around us, the limitations of our upbringing, and the limitations of the humanness that we have. Like we can try to transcend our bodies and our own, again, humanness, but what's the point? Like I'm all here for self-development. I'm all here for improving or be better than other people who are, you know what I mean? Like there's something so meaningful about recognizing and living within the bounds of humanness, and knowing that that is the framework that you're working from. I think we have like a pretty sweet deal, in the sense that we now have this like body of language of all of its iterations, body language, you know, obviously written and spoken language, and then obviously symbols through how we take in data through the world. But like there's all these different ways to relate to our humanness, and we have these tools at our disposal when we're creating even the most personal work. There's really, I find it very difficult to think of a way to communicate your own personal experiences in ways that people won't understand at all, unless we're leaning way too far into the specifics. I think it's actually quite easy. Leveling with people, being honest about how you think and feel, using the most appropriate symbols that you can, and the most appropriate like words. Like how can we articulate these things? And I know that it's more or less difficult. Like I don't know how to write a song. When people write like the most heartbreaking like songs, I'm like, damn, good for you. But find a language that works for you. I hope this made any sense. I know once again, once again, my answers were super elliptical. That's life, baby. That's really it. It's just coming down to the reality that life is more universal than you think, and less universal than you think. All little t truth, and the constant desire for articulating and reaching catharsis and connecting. The goal is always connection. Ain't that the little t truth? I'm gonna end this here. Bye.